besties, and welcome to another Genshin theory! 2.7 just got delayed, so that's less content for me to work with for a bit, but I'm honestly okay with that because it gives me more time to catch up on lore from 2.6. I've been meaning to make this video since 2.6 dropped, but because there's so much going on and Genshin lore can be really complicated, I needed a little more time to work on it. But now we're here, and I'm finally ready to tell you my predictions for Sumeru, most of which are based on the chasm. Sumeru is the next country we'll be going to into that. It's geographically part of the continent, so we won't need to get there by boat like we did with Inazuma. We'll be entering Sumeru through Liyue, more specifically the chasm. Sumeru's border is closest to the chasm, so naturally we'll enter the country through there. Besides the general layout of the continent, there are a lot of subtle hints in the chasm that say it has some connection to Sumeru. Something I haven't seen most people talk about is this hidden cavern with a twisted tree in it. This is the only place in the chasm where sunlight directly comes in, so plant life has found a way to grow there. Coincidentally, if you line the underground map up with the surface map, this area is right beneath where the Sumeru border is. I turned the underground map counterclockwise 90 degrees based on how I jumped underground through the chasm's maw and where my map marker was facing each time. I could be wrong about how these line up based on that, but I don't see any better way of looking at the two maps in relation to each other. Plus, that's not the only area that looks like it lines up fairly well with the topography of its counterpart, so I'll assume that it's alright until further notice. Point is, this little room probably has something to do with Sumeru. Sumeru is the nation of Dendro, so I bet there'll probably be a lot of plant life there. The northern section of the underground chasm is fairly devoid of plants except for this one part. The sunlight definitely has something to do with that since all plants need it to photosynthesize, but being that close to the Dendro country is an added bonus. Along with the twisted branches, there are 3 elemental totems representative of the 3 countries we've visited so far in this cavern. Anemo for Mondstadt, Geo for Liyue, and Electro for Inazuma. This could just be a coincidence, but personally I think this is a subtle way for the devs to tell us that this room has something to do with the next country. We actually have an NPC from Sumeru in the chasm. I'm not talking about anyone on the research team though, I'm talking about Xamarin, the big talking mushroom. Xamarin gives a world quest that requires us to cleanse the glowing narrows to help the other mushrooms there. Xamarin's quest doesn't tell us anything super valuable in terms of lore, but I think its presence alone is interesting enough. There's a big talking mushroom from Sumeru in the chasm, which is not part of Sumeru. Xamarin says ignorance might be a blessing and knowledge may bring forth calamity. This aligns with a huge part of my theories on Celestia. For a while now, I've been thinking that Celestia punishes people who learn too much about them or just the world in general. I think that's what happened to Guizhong, and it's probably going to happen to Lisa at some point. You can learn more about that in this video, link is in the description. I think we'll see something like that happen in Sumeru. After all, Sumeru is the nation of wisdom. The pursuit of knowledge is very important there, but from what we know so far, it seems like the more you learn, the more endangered you become. In the Teyvat story preview, Dainsleif says the god of wisdom's enemy is wisdom itself. As much as I don't believe a lot of what Dainsleif says, I'm totally with him here. We've been getting leaks about playable Dendro stuff lately. Along with that comes elemental reactions, one of which is Overgrown. Overgrown happens when Dendro interacts with Hydro, it causes mushrooms to form, and they explode, dealing AoE Hydro damage. That's just a leak right now, so it may not be final, but either way, I'm excited to finally see Dendro getting added soon. Knowing that one of the Dendro elemental reactions makes mushrooms grow is really interesting considering what we have with mushrooms in the game right now. We already talked about Xamarin, but it's not the only mushroom. The Glowing Narrows has a ton, and although it's not the only place on the map where fungi are commonly found, it's the place with the highest concentration of them. Not to mention we literally have new Hydro fungi enemies found exclusively in that section of the chasm. I don't think those enemies have anything to do with the Overgrown reaction, but I do think it's interesting that they're Hydro. I think we'll see them in Sumeru near lakes or rivers. We already know who to expect to meet in Sumeru. Lesser Lord Kusanali, the Dendro Archon and God of Wisdom, and Cyno, a member of the Sumeru Academia. There are a few other characters I think we'll see there that aren't explicitly confirmed to be from Sumeru though. Dottore, one of the Fatui Harbingers, was in the Sumeru Academia before joining the Fatui. Dottore joined the Academia after being chased out of his hometown by a mob and was later shunned in the Academia for his unethical behavior and ideals. Liyue and Inazuma both had Fatui Harbingers as the main antagonists for their Archon quest, so I assume Dottore will fill that role in Sumeru. In Mondstadt, the Abyss Order was the main antagonist, but we saw Signora take that over towards the end. Signora's behavior in Mondstadt was likely personal. I doubt the Tsaritsa wanted her to take out centuries of pent-up aggression on Venti to get his Gnosis when she easily got the others without a fight. I think Dottore will have an equally personal interaction with Kusanali. Given his backstory, it only seems fitting. In Mondstadt and Inazuma, the Harbinger antagonists had bad history with the Archons there. Signora was chased out of Mondstadt for using Pyro without a vision while Venti didn't defend her, and Scaramouche was discarded by A. Dottore was alienated in the Academia, and to a certain extent I think he'll want to take that out on Kusanali. She's the country's leader and the god of wisdom, so people will likely see her as the ultimate authority in the academia even if she doesn't officially have that role. Another character I think we'll hear about in Sumeru is Agedaha. In my opinion, Agedaha is likely originally from Sumeru. Morax found Agedaha in the chasm, where we can assume Agedaha was living underground for quite some time. The chasm clearly has ties to Sumeru, we went over some of them earlier. Agedaha is probably one of the sovereigns, and we know that the sovereigns were basically Old Tevat's equivalent of New Tevat's archons. So the sovereigns had their own individual countries. The Hydro sovereigns was probably Inazuma considering what we know about Enkanomiya, and the Geo sovereigns could have been Sumeru. Even though the Geo sovereign was found in Liyue, the current nation of Geo, that's likely just a coincidence. Liyue and Sumeru border each other, and Agedaha was found in the Liyuean location closest to Sumeru. It's plausible that Agedaha accidentally entered Liyue while hiding underground from the Primordial One. After being in hiding for so long, he accidentally ended up in another country and was found by a different god, Morax. Agedaha trusted Morax because they didn't try to kill him like the Primordial One did. But history repeats itself a lot in Genshin, so Agedaha was once again banished to live underground by an entity more powerful than himself. That's probably why Agedaha is so upset about being sealed beneath the Dragon Queller. He's gone through this exact thing before. Morax doesn't know that, so he just does what seems like the best possible solution, even though it only made Agedaha even more volatile. I do think that Agedaha was affected by erosion, and that's why he's so angry now, but he hasn't completely lost his memory, so it's not that bad yet. Agedaha still recognizes Morax after all this time. That anger is probably partially because of reliving past trauma, whether he knows it or not. I think it makes sense for Agedaha to remember being forced underground for the first time because it was such a strong emotional memory. The other thing he remembers is a very strong emotional memory, his friendship with Morax that ended in what he perceived as betrayal. Erosion can make people lose their memories and become impulsive and violent, but we've only seen the latter in Agedaha. Maybe erosion can only take so much of your memory, but you still retain the ones that are really significant to you. In that case, of course, Agedaha remembers the Primordial One forcing him and his fellow sovereigns underground where they suffered for thousands of years. In Agedaha's particular case, it was so bad that he could no longer stay in his own country either on accident or otherwise, and he lost his eyesight. No wonder he was so mad at Morax after what happened with them. But again, Morax didn't and still doesn't know that Agedaha is a sovereign. I doubt they even know what happened to the sovereigns at all. Morax is supposedly our oldest living character at 6,000 years old, but if Agedaha is a sovereign, that makes him way older, so it makes sense that Morax doesn't know. At the end of Zhongli's second story quest, he implies that Agedaha is far older than him, which would really only make sense if Agedaha was a sovereign. But if Agedaha really is from Sumeru and erosion has only partially affected his memories, I wonder if he'll remember Sumeru at all. In Inazuma, almost nobody knows about the sovereigns, but thanks to our trip to Enkanomiya, we do. There are a ton of traces of the Hydro Sovereign in Enkanomiya. It wouldn't surprise me if we saw something similar with Agedaha and Sumeru. With the hints about Sumeru and the chasm, I feel like there will probably be an underground map beneath Sumeru, so maybe we'll get that there. An NPC told us about a festival in Sumeru called the Sabzeruz Festival. It celebrates Lesser Lord Kusanali's birth. In my Conria Revisited series, I talked about how Kusanali's birth may not have been a birth in the traditional sense. It took me like 2 pages on that script to explain, so I'll try to summarize that very quickly here. The previous Dendro Archon, the God of the Woods, died in Conria during the Cataclysm. Kusanali was born immediately following their death and subsequently became the replacement Dendro Archon. I find it hard to believe that a baby was chosen to be the new Dendro Archon, so I don't believe that Kusanali was entirely a new life. Instead, I think she died thousands of years ago, but in her original life she had a Dendro vision. Being a vision holder or allogene, she had the potential to become a god and ascend to Celestia. Although it took a while and not every allogene gets to do that, Kusanali was sent back down to Tevat to replace the God of the Woods. The best way I can describe the Sabzeruz festival is by comparing it to real-life holidays. Take Christmas and Easter, for example. Christians celebrate Christmas because they believe it was the day when Jesus was born, and they celebrate Easter because they believe it was the day he was reborn after being crucified. To me, the Sabzeruz festival feels like less of a birth holiday and more like a rebirth holiday. Kusanali's birth during the Sabzeruz festival is more likely a celebration of the end of the Cataclysm. I know people in Tevat don't really know the details about the Cataclysm, but they do know that it happened. I doubt the Cataclysm lasted for a day or two. Something of that scale probably lasted for a few weeks or maybe even months. During that time, the people of Tevat were without their archons. 500 years ago, the only country that really knew how to handle itself alone was Mondstadt. After the Cataclysm, Sumeru was the only country that didn't get to see their Archon return. That was probably really hard on them, so the Sabzeruz festival is there to commemorate getting a new Archon to fill that void. Another thing about the Sabzeruz festival is that it will tell us when the Cataclysm happened during the year. I don't think that's extremely relevant information for theories, but at least they'll be interesting to know. In the underground section of the chasm, you can find a shriveled seed in a chest. The description of the seed is a seemingly withered object that seems to, by normal judgment, be a seed. However, it still has a surprising amount of life in it yet. Best not to eat it for now. I think it's worth noting that the game goes out of its way to make it seem like this isn't just a seed. It's referred to as an object that seems to be a seed. So I don't think this is a seed at all. I think this is going to be something like the Key of the Moon-Bathed Deep, which we got from a world quest on Watatsumi Island. The key was used to open the door to Enkanomiya. I think the shriveled seed will have the same function as the Key of the Moon-Bathed Deep for whatever Sumeru's underground map is. With the 2.7 delay, we'll have to wait even longer for Sumeru to come out. But again, I'm okay with that because I feel like I haven't had enough time to catch up on all the lore we have right now. I still feel like I'm missing some pretty big stuff in Enkanomiya, so I'd really like to revisit it at some point during the delay while I have free time. Speaking of free time, forgive me if I have a severe lack of it in the next few weeks. I'm graduating in 2 weeks, and after that I'll be getting ready to move to another state for college. I'm gonna be pretty busy soon, so don't be surprised if I end up missing a week of uploading. But you guys are always very patient and understanding with me when stuff like this comes up, so thank you for continuing to be amazing. Thank you so much for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and I'll see you next time. Bye, besties!